All right, guys, our next guest is known for his excellent analysis and high-energy delivery. You all know his fantastic work previously on the Fight Network and now his YouTube channel. He is here to help us get excited for UFC 225. Robin Black, the king of the 1-minute breakdown. Welcome back to Submission Radio. How are you, man?
Hey, doing good. I'm literally chilling. My wife works in a small town outside of Toronto, about an hour and 40 minutes, so I'm spending about half my weeks out here. I don't shave, and I don't fix my hair, and I just hang out and make videos on my computer and analyze fighting. And every now and again, I pop up and talk to you guys.
That's awesome. I'll tell you what, you not shaving and not fixing your hair still looks a lot better than when I try and fix my hair and shave. So you're doing it good over there, Robin. Let's talk about the big UFC 225 card that's coming up this weekend. We want to kick things off by talking about the big fight, Robert Whittaker versus Yoel Romero 2. Before we get to this fight, I just want to get your thoughts on what you saw. What was your perception of Yoel Romero's performance in his win over Luke Rockhold? Because I feel like a lot of people were a little bit down on him after his loss to Robert Whittaker. But after that win against Luke Rockhold, even though he missed weight and there was some controversy leading into the fight, I feel like a lot of people are higher on Yoel Romero than in a long time.
That's true. I agree. And if you wonder why, I mean, he knocked him out. And so many people, it was interesting. I love it when people send me things to break down. But for some reason, people asked about that one a lot, and I didn't have the video. But it also, I don't know, it's not an uncommon way that he did it. It was literally from southpaw versus southpaw. So against orthodox versus orthodox, we'll use a double jab right hand. Super common. Especially in mixed martial arts. It allows you to cross the distance. It threatens other things. The second jab keeps the guy potentially busy. It's a simple technique in boxing, and it's a simple technique in boxing, but it works really well in MMA. But against southpaw versus southpaw, it's exactly the same thing, except for the double right hand and then the left hand to finish it. It was a very simple technique, but the reason it worked is because of how patient he was. And not just patient that he had the energy later, but patient that he didn't give away everything early. You'll see Josh Barnett early in his fights, he would sometimes come in and he would throw a jab and then a right hand, and the right hand would intentionally not reach you a few times, so you would feel safe. And then later he would do it and be patient enough to give you the full business when he had it. And that's what Yoel did, which was super cool. It showed he was smart, his patience, he didn't burn out. He's just super mature now as a fighter. He's matured a great deal as a fighter. And I think that's why people feel that way. Because against Whittaker, he burned out. He was really beating the shit out of Bobby Knuckles for 10 minutes, and then he was a little more tired. Whittaker realized, holy shit, I can do this. He's not quite as strong, not quite as fast, not quite as ferocious and intense, and I think I can win these last 3 rounds, and he did. But I think that little adjustment of patience is the adjustment you want to make if you're Romero. So I think it's a good one, but I think I'm not some genius sitting here, the only guy who sees that. I think Whittaker sees that pretty clearly. So he knows that's the adjustment. So it's going to be really interesting.
Well, the interesting thing is when we asked Robert Whittaker about that, he for a guy who doesn't talk trash and is very, I guess, composed and sometimes reserved, he scoffed at the notion of Romero fighting him the way he did against Rockhold. When we said, look, do you see the guy who fought Rockhold? Do you think that would be a tougher version? People say, he'll have more cardio. He's more reserved. He's more composed. And Whittaker said, I would love it. I pray that he fights me the way he fought Rockhold because a stationary target. And Whittaker just kind of laughed like, yeah, I hope he does exactly that.
That's a really, really, first of all, totally the right questions to ask him. And secondly, great answer. Because every change isn't just for the better. So a less aggressive, less busy, less intense Yoel Romero is also a less mobile, less busy, etc. These are exactly why it's such a fun thing to kind of look at these things. There's so many moving parts, and any one thing causes ripples, which is amongst the beauty of it, right? So people will go, oh man, I don't know, and we could use any example, and it's part of the fun of watching. It's like, you should kick more against so-and-so. Well, if you kick more, that means you're doing X less, or you're on 1 foot more, or you're planting your foot. It changes many things. And the smart fighter, which Whittaker clearly is, looks at it and goes, well, great. If he is more patient, that means he doesn't beat the shit out of me for the first 10 minutes. And if that's the case, I'll heat up and I'll move around him. It's a beautiful example of exactly how many moving parts and how everything affects everything, which is why fighting's one of the reasons it's so awesome.
With the wrestling, obviously Romero's got tremendous wrestling. In the first fight, Romero sort of used it to I guess, wear Whittaker down, but he didn't have too much success with it. He didn't really have any long-term success where he would take Whittaker down and, do a lot of damage. Whittaker, for the most part, got up. And we saw against Rockhold, he didn't really utilize his wrestling. So do you think that there's a possibility that Romero kind of goes, you know what? I didn't do much with it in the first fight. Maybe I'll just kind of ditch the wrestling, maybe throw some feints here just to keep Whittaker guessing, but maybe ditch what got me tired and just focus on keeping it a stand-up fight.
The issue with wrestling, so we could say the same thing when we see Damian Maia not have success getting it to the ground, when we see Tyron Woodley not really take down Stephen Thompson as much as you'd think, maybe 1 round here and there out of 10, when you see Yoel Romero not really do it, and we see it a lot, and this conversation happens a lot. We're acting as if it is the choice of the other guy. That if all I have to do is switch flip my switch from striking to wrestling, and therefore I'll wrestle more. The reason that there is less and less and less wrestling all the time, the first reason is guys got paid more and were more successful, and they could see it. They were more exciting and so forth. They're rewarded for fighting standing. So there was a vested financial interest in finding the answer to do that for a lot of teams. And it didn't even have to be 30, 40% of guys. All you need is a lot of coaches and a lot of the minds sitting there going, how do we change this game in the following ways? And in this way, it was, how do we change this game to make it harder for other people to take us down? And the answer was, we used to move in, and then we would fight, and I would throw some punches, and then I would grab you. But once I grabbed you, we did this thing that we used to call takedown defense. And even great wrestlers who commentate and analyze use that term just because it's used. So you'll hear Cormier say, oh, great takedown defense. Cormier knows full level that takedown defense isn't a thing. What that is saying, I will give myself a single goal, and that is to stop something. And that's not wrestling. Wrestling in any situation, the only goal is to improve my position. Doesn't mean I have to take you down. Doesn't mean I have to stop you from taking it. I just have to get to a better position than I am right now. So we used to have this idea that if you grab my leg, I would defend it this way. And if you did a single, I would do that against a double and an underhook. And it was this thing we called takedown defense. And then all of a sudden people started going, that entire spider web of shit will not be relevant at all if I just stop you from grabbing me. And the Mayweathers and Stephen Thompsons of the world can stop you from being able to touch them much at all. If I can't punch you, it's very hard for me to grab you. And I do it with controlling the distance and the range and using movement, all these things we've been talking about the last 4 or 5 years. That's what they're doing. So Yoel Romero doesn't wrestle because to wrestle, I have to grab somebody. And to grab somebody clean, I have to be in a situation where I can do it and not get drilled in the chin. And that's the part of the game that has changed. That part of the game has changed dramatically. So even the great wrestlers, the way to stop a wrestler isn't out wrestle him. It's don't let him wrestle you. And that's what's happening. And so even geniuses like Yoel Romero have to admit it's happening. And to deal with it, they must be able to win exchanges. Jacare, all of these guys, whether they're wrestlers or grapplers or jiu-jitsu players, all of that is irrelevant. They have to be able to force you to realistically engage them in the outside. And as you just put it, use a few feints to kind of, that doesn't work either, because you and I might look at them and go, oh, is that real? Is that not real? But these guys with thousands and thousands of hours, they know this is fake. They know that I'm not really punching them. So that the skill of feinting even has become watered down as other guys react to it. So it's this phenomenal change in sensitivity and understanding of how to make a situation that you cannot wrestle. And so that's happening to all these guys, all the best wrestlers. And the guys who need it on the ground, like the Damian Maias of the world, Damian Maia would just go in and get your single leg. Once that began, he had ways to get you. So, and we would learn how to stop Damian Maia's single leg. Very hard. But if we can learn how to not let Damian Maia get our single leg, it's very easy. And so that's what's happening with the game right now. So even the Yoel Romeros of the world who are geniuses in wrestling, they must strike at distance. And they must win those exchanges, or at least win them enough to gain entry to what they really want. So that it's just changed so much. And the greats, the guys like Yoel Romero, they understand it so well that they understand what they must do, which is why you see him striking so much more at range.
Now, that's a fascinating point. And I mean, it's going to be a great fight because Robert Whittaker is so well-rounded and is so dangerous in so many different areas. But in the first fight, Robin, we saw he had an issue with his knee. We saw as the rounds went on, it affected him even though he sort of fought through it. So with Romero going in possibly with a different strategy, possibly looking to make it into the later rounds and not exerting himself early, Robert Whittaker coming in with both knees healthy, do you think there's a possibility that we see a completely different fight to that first one that we saw?
I think so. And I was just chatting with Michael Bisping the other day, and he never fought Robert Whittaker.
He was supposed to fight him in Melbourne, yeah.
Yeah, but he did fight Kelvin Gastelum. And that generation of guys are fucking different.
Yeah.
They really are. And then the 17-year-olds right now that are going to be them are even more different. So I suspect it is always possible when you have one of these young guys that everything you just outlined makes you sit there and go, Jesus, Whittaker, how good is he? Like, we think he's really, there are moments where he just, and Kelvin is like this as well. You can group them together really well, where you're like, they could be so fucking good that they could just dance around these guys and annihilate them. We saw Kelvin do that to Mike in the early minutes. We've seen moments where Whittaker can move around. You can't get to him. We saw Kelvin do it to that Army fucking man. I always forget his name
Kennedy.
For some reason. Tim Kennedy. I don't know why. I love Tim Kennedy.
Yeah.
I can never remember his name, and he's brilliant and incredibly talented, and I saw him talking to Rogan, and he's very smart, and it's his name, it's a name thing. But we've seen some of these guys do that, and could we see Whittaker do that? 100%. 100% we could. And it's against guys who are in their later 30s and early 40s that you feel that you're less surprised when you see them get beat. Having said that, just like you said, there is a feeling that maybe Yoel Romero is more dangerous than he's ever been. And you guys know me, I don't. It's illogical to me to make predictions on things with so many variables, but this is one where I just have a much easier time picturing Whittaker suddenly us going, oh shit, he's one of these young killers that can do this, than I do Yoel Romero landing what he landed on Rockhold.
Sure.
Again, that's just, your imagination making connections with the information that you have, but I can see that a lot easier in my imagination.
And one of the other things that I sort of noticed, or me and Casper noticed sort of leading into this fight is, and Romero sort of spoke about this a little bit more, I think he spoke about it with Rogan, but you do kind of notice it as well when he does the countdown and he's doing his training, is the fact that, he is over 40 years old and he has put his body through a tremendous amount of, drills and training through his wrestling and his fighting. And he did mention the fact that he's not far away from retirement, that he hurts every day. So going into this fight mentally, do you think that affects him, those thoughts of retirement, the fact that he knows his body has a very limited amount of time left in the sport? And do you think it's a positive reaction or a negative reaction?
And the fact that this is probably his last title shot if he doesn't become champion.
That's true. And it depends how important that is to you. The older guys, I think it's more important to them because the titles meant a lot more 5 and 7 years ago when they were at their, at their sort of part of their peak of desire, right? Where they don't mean what they meant. I mean, you take 100 people who would identify themselves as moderate UFC fans, and you ask them who the 185-pound champion of the world is, and I don't know what number says Robert Whittaker or what number says Michael Bisping or George St. Pierre or Chris Weidman or Luke Rockhold or
100%.
Yoel Romero. Like, I don't know what that is. It isn't that high. And that's a separate conversation. I've had a lot of conversations lately with friends who love the UFC, even guys who work there or have worked there, who are like, what the fuck are we doing right now when we were all young and lit up and excited in these offices? And Dana would talk about how, boxing fucked itself by like having 1,000 titles and making fights that nobody was interested in and all that kind of stuff. Are we doing some of that right now?
The top heavy cards.
But that's a separate conversation.
Sure.
That's not a conversation about martial arts and how it gets there. It's a conversation about, the challenges of running big businesses, more than anything, I think. But to your point, I think I've seen so many times, I've experienced that feeling myself, and I've seen it with so many friends that when they say, and I have friends, high-level friends, George is one of these, St. Pierre, who their last 5 or 6 fights, they were like, in the weeks before, they're like, this is 100% the last time I'm ever going to do this. And even Cormier's had that moment, and it's powerful. It's like, there's nothing to leave. There's nothing to wait for. There's like, fuck it, we'll die there.
So you're saying GSP wanted to retire like 5-6 fights ago?
GSP, in the weeks, and this is not uncommon, you could find 20 top fighters and 5 of them would tell you this. And wow. But they also, the reason, the smart ones, when they say, do you want to retire? I got to think about it, because they understand themselves. They truly feel in the weeks before, they're like, you know what? This is the last time I'm ever going to do this. This is the last time I'm ever going to do this. So let's leave it all out there. George had that experience multiple times in his last number of fights.
Wow.
I'm sure Bisping's had that experience. I'm sure Yoel Romero might have thought that on another walk. A lot of these guys, some of them, Anderson Silva had it 10 fights before he retired, and he had it a few times on the way through. They believe in the weeks leading up that this is the last time I'm ever going to do this. And I think some of that is just, it's in us. There's the nature of it. It's so final. It's so, everything is on the line, that if you think that it'll never happen again and that this is it, let's go and cherish it and enjoy it. Try to wring every minute we can out of it. You'd be surprised. The top guys, I'm going to say, conservatively, from my experience and the conversations I've had over a decade, that 2 to 3 out of 10 of the top guys in the last 5 or 6 fights, maybe more, every single one of those in their mind and to the people close to them is going to be their last fight. It's very common. And I think it's a powerful mindset.
I'm very curious with this fight. There's a lot of stakes for guys. Obviously, Romero, like, this is arguably his last title shot as long as Robert Whittaker's champion, if he doesn't beat him this weekend. But also Whittaker talking about how Romero's too old to improve at this point, and I almost feel like Robert Whittaker, being such a young guy, hasn't even hit his prime yet. So it's a opportunity for him to really make it an even bigger statement and show how much he's improved from the previous fight. But Robin, I know we don't have you for too much longer, so I want to cover a couple more fights with you. Obviously, the co-main, RDA versus Covington. I want to get your thoughts on this one, because easily Colby Covington's toughest test to date. He's in another interesting position where, he's talked so much trash, and he's on a good streak, but he's kind of talked himself into this interim title fight, and there's a lot of stakes here. He really needs to put up or shut up in a sense. But considering how many shots he ate against Damian Maia, who obviously isn't a striker, do you expect Colby to have a bit of a tough time against a striker as dangerous as RDA? Because while Colby is excellent once he gets you in that clinch, sometimes he kind of does keep the fight standing for maybe longer than is good for him.
I just want to say quickly that if you lose me, just call me right back, and it'll come through Skype here, because this could die.
Yeah, no worries.
So Colby Covington is a fascinating one. There's a lot of things about this that are very interesting to me. Like, you take the fight, you cannot take a fight like this and just say, let's remove the emotion from it. Let's remove the emotion. Let's remove the consequences and the stakes, because that's always there. Whatever you created is now a part of the truth of what this means. And when you elevate, so Conor McGregor, one of his superpowers is to elevate the meaning and the heat and the temperature of these fights to such a degree because he's very good at handling that. He always has, and he will thrive in it, and most of us won't. And if we're fighting him and we flounder from it, all the more power to him. And if we don't, then he'll have a hard fight. And every fight's hard anyways, but his confidence will be there in it. Will yours? He doesn't need you to fail, but it sure doesn't hurt if you do start to flounder.
Yeah.
And I don't know that Colby Covington has yet really felt or prepared himself for the magnitude and the weight of elevating it to that degree. So you've probably seen this many times, and we all have, and anybody watching or listening has definitely seen it, where there's a lot of shit talk, and then it's a bad fight. And I don't say bad fight. That ain't a Robin Blackism. That's that's what the public sees, and it's their definition of a bad fight. And I look at it and go, oh, it's interesting. And there's a lot of hesitation. There's a lot of mental aspects to it, and people are feeling pressure. And I find all that interesting. But to a lot of people, they'll call it a, quote, bad fight. And ones that pop to mind that you can go back and watch, if you Google Ellenberger and Rory McDonald, and you look at some of the things that Ellenberger said, it was out of character for him to call Rory McDonald a fruit stick and start playing that, and people were just starting to experiment with that. And then he did nothing for that fight. Rory jabbed him in the face a bunch of times, and he hesitated. There's extra weight to the reality of getting knocked out by a fruit stick that you called a fruit stick, and you named him these things, and you said these things about him, and now he is big and strong, and he's not fucking afraid of you, and you've elevated the weight of that. And Colby has done fine with that. He did fine with that against Damian Maia, but that's not an eternal thing. It's something you have to prepare for. It feels different every time. The reality, these are real people in real emotional situations. So I don't know that it wouldn't surprise me if one day he folds in a fight. It's just a lot is going on. And I know we're going to probably talk about Mike Jackson and CM Punk. Mike Jackson is definitely at risk of the same thing, where the higher the pressure gets and the less truly prepared for it you may be, you can fold or be flat or I wasn't myself tonight. Well, you are yourself. You're you. You're always you. The pressures of it affected your performance. And that's going to be at play no matter what in scenarios like this. But that very aspect that we were just talking about of the wrestler not being able to get the first grip, RDA isn't necessarily the guy who has fully embraced that. He will move towards you. He will try to get into range to land big punches with you. He will try to take you down and land on top. He will heavily engage you. So that is a good thing. And when I say he will, he often has. Doesn't mean he can't be a different guy. Jose Aldo was a completely different guy when he fought Frankie Edgar than he'd been in those last 15 fights. He fought backing up that whole night. He didn't do that a lot. He was the definition of pressure. So you can change, and RDA could very well change as well. But RDA traditionally, and emotion matters to him too, has moved towards you, been happy to engage you, and was more than thrilled to go his offense against yours. So that favors Covington in the sense that he can get that first grip, but it doesn't favor him in the sense that he's going to take some shots. And RDA and I know Lawler was injured. It was in Winnipeg, and I was there. I was blown away by Dos Anjos that night, not just his skills and stuff, but his strength and confidence and like that knowledge that he belongs with the best guys in the world. And other than Damian Maia in his 40s, Covington does not have knowledge of that. He doesn't. He has belief that he may have belief that that's so, but you don't know you can beat the best guys in the world until you have. So that confidence, emotion, all of those things are heavily at play when those two, and the aspect that RDA is often going to apply pressure to you. That can be great for Covington, but he's going to be in a fucking fist fight. It's going to be the heavy fist fight, and when he does look to control with his grappling, the answer to him is not out wrestle him, but maybe sweep him or maybe work from half guard or threaten submissions. That's a dangerous game to play by Dos Anjos if he's on the bottom. But we got a cool fight. We got a really, really cool fight with a ton of variables that are very hard to predict, those are the fights I love.
There's going to be so much to look out for just from what Covington looks like when he's walking out to the octagon, to how much energy he exerts before the fight even starts. We've seen so many fighters just tire themselves out. But let me ask you this. You mentioned his grappling. How do you rate his wrestling compared to some of the greats in the similar divisions, guys like Khabib Nurmagomedov, guys like Ben Askren? How highly do you rate Covington's abilities?
There wasn't. So I've heard from Mike Brown at the gym and Jorge, who trains with him every day. Yeah. And those guys train with the best of the best. And they're like, this guy's a stud, like a true stud. And a lot of it is the mental. Like, some guys can be pushed to the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth resistance, and then they'll give something up and change position and fight again. And he'll keep pushing through it. So that's really hard to deal with. That true, like, if it takes a seventh and an eighth and a ninth, physical conflict will go. And so you hear that and you see elements of it. But it's the fight with Dong Hyun Kim where you're like, okay, this guy can fucking wrestle. Like, this guy can wrestle old school. People aren't sure that this kind of wrestling still works, but some guys are really good enough. It's that fight. Because Dong Hyun Kim, for whatever reason, is probably not as appreciated of how brilliant he is. And so early in Dong Hyun Kim's career, he was knocking guys out with a left hand. And I commentated 4 or 5 of those, 6 or 7 probably of his first fights in Deep with me and John Ramdeen, and he was just ripping guys with left hands from southpaw. And then he got to the UFC, and he was a grinder, and he was grinding and working you from this position where he's riding this hip standing. He'll attack your neck. He'll try to fight, attack from here and beat you up and grind you out and ride you. And that awful kind of 15 minutes of that is just terrible. And he was doing it a lot. And then he started to try to get more exciting again, spinning back elbows and stuff, because that's how guys made money. And we saw him go back to that. Well, Covington out Dong Hyun Kim, out stun gun in that fight. That's really hard to do. Beat guys at things they're dominant at. And when you see that, you're like, okay, this is real. If it was a wrestling match, I don't care how strong and smart and tactical and skilled RDA is. If we were just wrestling, Colby is going to win that wrestling match. But we're not. We have to get a hold in wrestling, to get a hold of your thigh or your body lock or whatever. You don't take elbows on the way in. In fighting, you do. So that changes things dramatically. The thing is, you mentioned he took shots with Damian Maia and kind of wanted them. You need that. You have to have that if you're going to be the guy who just goes and goes and goes, second position, third position, fourth, counter, until you give up. To be that guy, you have to take shots, and he does. So he's a really great fighter. He really is a brilliantly talented fighter. I would be a bigger fan if he wasn't so mouthy and flashy and manipulated emotion and controversy and conflict so much. I would. He would be one of these ones that would be a fighter's fighter. However, now he's an occasional audience's fighter, and that'll make him more money. So good on him. I don't begrudge him that. But I'm less of just sort of that deeply connected fan as an analyst and as an appreciator of martial arts, because of all those other things. They distract me from how brilliant of a fighter he is.
Yeah, and you mentioned that Dong Hyun Kim fight. It's crazy. I was watching the other day where Dong Hyun Kim went for the trip, and he pretty much had him, and everybody else would have fallen, and Colby was kind of midair, and then midair he caught his balance, and then he was back to sort of grinding him and clinching him against the cage, and he's so relentless, which is why, with that wrestling mentality, I'm very curious what sort of the later rounds are going to look like of the fight. If both guys are tied, if it is a grinding fight, Ade's experience, Colby's wrestling mentality, will he be able to push through? It's actually a very fascinating fight. But as we let you go,
it is.
You mentioned Mike Jackson, because we are about to run out of time, Robin, and we could believe us, we could chat to you all day. CM Punk versus Mike Jackson. I want to get your thoughts on this fight. There isn't a ton of footage to really go by. Obviously, Mike Jackson, for those who don't know, he's had a Muay Thai fight. He's won an amateur MMA fight. He's had boxing fights. He's knocked people out in boxing. So he has a ton more experience than CM Punk. But, as someone who's actually fought before in yourself, what would you say were the biggest differences between fighting for the first time ever compared to when you had your second fight? I imagine it would have been quite different, and something that CM Punk will likely be experiencing this second time around. And I guess if you're his coaches at Rufus Sport, what would you sort of be working on for this second fight going off the first one?
So everybody talks, oh, that you have to have so much courage and, to make the walk. And like, you hear this a lot and you really don't. Being stupid or crazy or uneducated or like just a lunatic or, uneducatedly fearless. There's many ways to go take a fight. The second one, you have to be courageous. The second one, you have to really, what the fuck is waiting for you. You know the pressure of the audience. You know the sound of that thing. You know your heart rate. You know the anxiety that you have. You know how much those shots hurt when somebody's filled with adrenaline and panic and in and of themselves. And you know the shame and the embarrassment and the pain and the humiliation. CM Punk was humiliated. And so I respect the shit out of him for coming back. It is not the same fight. Doesn't represent the same thing to me as some dummy, and I'm a fan now, and I respect him as a martial artist now. So I don't mean to be disrespectful, but when he walked out the first time, he was just some idiot. I mean that. It doesn't matter what he thought he knows. He now knows he didn't know anything about fighting, about what it meant, about the fear and the anxiety and the pain and that you're hoping that something you do every day in training you might be able to almost do in the pressure of it. Now he knows that. That now to choose to do it, possibly be ridiculed a second time, that takes a lot of guts and heart and balls. And I appreciate it greatly and I admire it greatly. And I did it. And I lost the second time. And the third time was even harder. Even harder. And as people are saying things, oh, now the stupidity is over. Well, of the next 7 I had, I won 4 of them, but I had to go through those to even understand it, to even be in a position to try. Like, it's hard, and I admire him for doing that. Jackson's had a few more. He'll also, but everything I've said, Duke has said that to 500 young people. They haven't all dealt with the same pressure this guy has, and he's not that young, but he's young and fighting. I talked to Duke on the telephone today. We didn't talk about this a great deal, but Duke's such a calm, family-like leader, and he'll have him mentally ready. And he'll have him more ready than Mike Jackson will be mentally. Mike Jackson, doesn't matter how many fights he had. The big ones are different. The first time you're televised on TV nationwide, that comes into your mind. The first time that there's a lot more meaning. And this kid, and I have nothing against him. I hope he does well, too. I hope they have a great fight. These two young novices or young in fighting, and they push each other to the limit and learn something about each other. I have no begrudge. I don't even care that it's on a UFC pay-per-view because to me, that's all, the hype of what that means is gone anyways. So we see all kinds of low-level fights in the UFC now. So I don't begrudge these two guys being there. But the weight, the pressure, the seriousness of the moment that Mike Jackson is going to feel, he has less preparation for it than Punk has. 2 years of preparation since that last time, and he had 2 years then. Yeah. 2 years of full time. Only John Jones and Conor McGregor have the money to buy a condo in Milwaukee and train full time for 2 years.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what a lot of mid-card UFC fighters could do if they're like, all right, let's just get better for 2 years with the best training that we can find? He's going to get a lot better. He's going to have improved a great deal. And so Jackson is busy making his own hashtags and coming up with these things and saying stuff. And none of that shit's going to matter. And you don't notice CM Punk's not too much in it doing any of that stuff. He's focused on fighting. Again, I'm breaking my own line of thinking. And maybe it's because I like hanging out with you guys. But you put a gun to my head and you say you're forced to pick a winner. I would say it's much more likely that CM Punk wins this fight based on 2 years of nonstop improvement and the mental preparation of a great leader like Duke Roufus against a guy who's in way over his head and he's kind of all alone. I put a lot of confidence in CM Punk having a much better night, and it's going to get hard for both of them. If you were going to prepare, you asked what you would do to prepare CM Punk. You prepare him that we are not here to win. We are here to have the best performance we can possibly have and to welcome it when it gets hard because that's a chance to show that we can overcome that. If we go in with that, we've increased our chance to win dramatically. And he needs to go in there excited about the challenge and excited that he's going to get chances to show his toughness and his heart that he didn't get to show last time, and welcome them. And that kid, the other kid, is more likely to fold when the pushback happens a second, a third, a fourth time. That kid is fighting in the UFC on a pay-per-view card, and he didn't even fight in the last year or whatever. And I mean, it's way too much. You talk about it being too much for CM Punk. This is way too much for young Mike Jackson. And that gives CM Punk the advantage that you would expect he should go in and win this fight. And he should win it. Gun to my head, you're forced to make a bet or you're going to harm my dog. CM Punk inside the distance.
Look at this. Predictions from Robert Black, man. This is amazing.
It's a much more logical outcome just based on experience, amount of training, level of training, and high level of preparation. It's a much more logical, much more likely outcome. But the best I can say is much more likely because we know how these things go.
Sure.
And also, this is a guy that's had a lot of experience in front of big crowds. And even though pro wrestling and MMA is different, he's been on the biggest stages of them all, from WrestleMania to the biggest cards in front of, with a lot on the line, because he has had some big pressure moments in his career. Robin, just quickly as we wrap up, it's a massive card. I mean, there's so many storylines in this one, from legends possibly having their last fight to potential new title contenders coming out of spots like the early prelims. So just quickly, how do you rate this card compared to the cards that we've had recently? And also, what is one sleeper of a fight that people aren't sort of looking at that you're sort of really excited about?
Overeem and Curtis Blades is a cool fight.
Yeah.
It's a cool fight. We're seeing these super, mega, ultra talented Alistair Overeem. Smart. He knows shit about fighting that, that it takes 20 years to learn. But then you've got young, super athletic, improving constantly, better and better. The dude just fucking beat Mark Hunt. So you go and ask him about fighting somebody with that much experience and that much skill and stuff, and he's like, fuck, I did it like 4 months ago. So I love that fight. I'm a big Alistair Overeem fan. I'm a big fan of his work, of his body of work. And I really like Curtis Blades. I really, really like Curtis Blades a lot. All the way through, he's been one of these ones where you're like, holy fuck, how does that, like, suplexing people on instinct early in his career. So I love that fight. I'm a huge Robert Whittaker fan, so I'm excited to see if he's as good as I think these young guys can be. But if he is, and Yoel Romero, Bobby Knuckles being incorrect, is still improving, then we get a great, brilliant fight either way. And to be honest, I'm cheering for CM Punk because I can relate heavily to that walk out the second time. And should he not win this fight, I'll be getting on the phone to Duke and say, Duke, let me talk to this guy. I did it a third. I lost twice, and I wasn't under the scrutiny he's under. But in Canada, in the mixed martial arts scene, I used to wear eye makeup and sing in a rock band. I took just the same amount of hatred that on a smaller level, so not the same amount, but the same type. And going in there a second time is really hard. A third time's even harder. But I think that he's likely to be able to find a way to win this one. And so, and earn it. And if he does, then good on him.
Yeah, there are many good fights. Of course, we didn't get to chat about him, but of course, Megan Anderson and Holly Holm, that's another interesting one. Claudia Davis, Carla Esparza, that's an awesome one. Benavidez and Sergio Pettis on the early prelims. Yeah. Benavidez kind of looking to keep his spot. He's on a crazy streak, and the UFC, I think, kind of want him to lose, so they've got a new contender. Tai Tuivasa, Arlovsky, maybe you'll see some shoeys. There's another a lot of, and like you mentioned, Overeem and Blades, I'm really looking forward to that one as well. So it's a great card.
I don't know how or what time I'm going to watch it because I'm commentating BKB, Bare Knuckle Boxing 11 in London on June 9th, the same night. But I think the UFC starts, what time is it? 6 hours later in London. So I don't know. I'll have to do the math and figure out how I can watch it. But BKB 11, it's on Channel Fight. It's like $6 or £6 on pay-per-view, and it's bare knuckle boxing. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful art form in its own right too. So hopefully I'll get to commentate that and somehow figure out the math to see 225 before or after.
Maybe you can have your phone out while you're commentating as well, and you can just like stream it on Fight Pass as well.
Commentate
One eye on the fight. I
accident.
think you're a talented guy, Rob, and I think if anyone could handle that, you could handle that. So I'm glad you mentioned that, so people can check you out. Assuming you're going to be doing commentary, they can of course check you out on Twitter as well. Robin Black MMA. I love what you do with the 1 minute breakdown. That stuff is absolutely incredible.
I love doing it. Instagram too. It's at Robin Black MMA, and on Instagram you're able to put them all together. So I have like 140 1 minute breakdowns, one after the other after the other.
Wow.
So, and I see the obsessives because I see they'll like 28 in a row when they discover it, which is really cool.
That's awesome, man. And of course, your YouTube channel where you go into things and sort of, do extended breakdowns and things like that. I love what you're doing there as well. So,
I have a new website too.
Oh, nice.
I have a new website, it's robinblackmma.com. And if anybody is watching or listening from Dublin, Ireland, June 22nd, I'm doing my one-man show at Liberty Hall in Dublin, Ireland, and John Kavanagh will be my interview guest at the live show.
Nice.
Ah, nice.
Wow.
We had the pleasure of interviewing John across Australia, so he's a great guy. You guys, I can't wait to see how it goes.
You guys are gonna have great chats as well.
You need to come down to Australia and do a Robin Black show.
I will 100%. I would think it's in the fall, and I'm still also in conversation to do work for One Championship. If I do, some of it will be from Singapore, and Singapore to Australia is only like 5 or 6 hours.
Yeah.
Unlike Toronto to Australia, which is like 30 or something.
Yeah. Awesome, dude. Well, look, we'd be lucky to have you anytime, and we'd love it if you came down our part of the world. So you're always welcome. I know, Robin, we said it was going to be about 25 minutes, and I think we've doubled that. So we apologize, but we thank you so much for your time, man. Really appreciate it. Always great chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I love hanging with you guys anytime. Enjoy the hostilities, my friends.
Thank you, Robin. Take care.